Most virtual power plant decks don't fail because the numbers are wrong. In fact, many of them are numerically correct. The problem is more subtle. Spreadsheets are very good at modeling energy. Flows, prices, dispatch, and returns. They are much less capable of modeling systems. This episode is a systems-level analysis of why projections diverge from reality. Even when the technology works, the market exists, and the team executes well. What follows is not a critique of competence. It's an explanation of why outcomes depend on variables that sit outside the spreadsheet. Spreadsheets do a lot of things exceptionally well. They model energy flows with precision. They calculate dispatch revenue. They track hardware costs and project financial returns. But what they miss entirely are the forces that determine whether those numbers ever materialize. Behavioral dynamics, institutional friction, and time. Most VPP decks don't fail because the math is wrong. They fail because spreadsheets model energy beautifully, but systems poorly. That gap is the paradox at the center of this episode. This needs to be said clearly. This is not a criticism of founders. Entrepreneurs are solving real problems with real technical sophistication. It's not a criticism of investors. Capital allocators are doing rigorous diligence within the frameworks available to them. And it's not a criticism of VPPs. Virtual power plants are a legitimate and necessary evolution of grid infrastructure. This is a structural observation. The variables that determine outcomes are precisely the ones that resist formalization in traditional financial models. Most VPP decks are strong where spreadsheets excel. Installed capacity, dispatch revenue, incentives and credits, hardware cost curves, gross margins at scale. If VPPs were purely technical systems, if batteries behaved like servers and customers behaved like APIs, these models would work beautifully. But infrastructure doesn't behave like software. And that's where the divergence begins. Energy infrastructure exists inside real systems: people, institutions, regulators, markets, geography. None of these variables operate independently. They interact, reinforce, and constrain each other over time. When models assume isolation, when they treat deployment as frictionless and behavior as stable, they unintentionally strip away the very forces that determine success or failure. Infrastructure is not a closed system, and treating it like one produces false confidence. Where VPP decks start to break is where systems start to matter. Not technology, not math, but behavior, institutions, and time. These are not edge cases or minor adjustments. They are first-order variables. They are systematically underrepresented, not because people ignore them, but because they resist the kind of formalization that capital markets reward. This missing layer is where projections quietly disconnect from reality. Most models assume stable participation. Reality delivers participation decay. Customers opt out. Preferences shift. Stress events reduce tolerance. UX friction accumulates. People override optimization when grid participation conflicts with personal priorities. People are not assets. They do not behave deterministically. This doesn't invalidate VPPs, but it makes outcomes noisier and less predictable than models suggest. The second blind spot is institutional behavior. Utilities optimize for reliability, not innovation speed. Regulators move slower than markets. Programs are redesigned mid-deployment. Rules evolve continuously. These are not failures. They are features of institutions designed for stability. But they introduce delays, reversals, and path dependence that spreadsheets tend to smooth away. And over time, those delays compound. The third blind spot is deployment. Most decks assume linear scaling. More capital leads to more installs, which leads to more capacity. Clean, simple, wrong. Installer capacity doesn't scale instantly. Each geography behaves differently. Permitting varies. Capital recycling introduces lag. In infrastructure, time dominates cost. Any model that assumes smooth deployment will misprice speed advantage. This pattern doesn't persist because anyone is hiding anything. It persists because incentives converge. Capital markets reward clarity. Spreadsheets reward tractability. Friction resists simplification. So the system naturally produces models that are legible, but incomplete. That incompleteness isn't malicious. It's structural. And until the incentives change, the pattern repeats. The key shift is a change in question. The old question is, are the numbers right? The better question is, what has to go right for these numbers to materialize? That reframes analysis from validation to condition setting. It forces attention onto behavior, institutions, and operations. That is a very different analytical lens, and it's where real edge begins. None of these frictions mean VPPs are flawed concepts. They don't imply poor investments. They explain why outcomes diverge from DEX. Even when the technology works, the team executes, and the opportunity is real. Understanding this gap isn't about skepticism. It's about precision. There is a way to model this missing layer, but it's no longer a spreadsheet problem. It's a systems problem. It requires modeling feedback loops, time delays, and non-linear interactions. And that's where I'll stop. Because beyond this point, the discussion stops being public. TaBIS focuses on the layers that determine real outcomes. Which VPP strategies compound, and which stall. The institutional and temporal forces models miss, and where capital creates durable advantage. If you're building, investing, or allocating capital in this space, this lens matters more than any single forecast. What separates projections from reality are the layers that determine which VPP strategies actually work. TaBIS provides systems-level analysis for that gap, not to predict outcomes, but to understand the constraints that shape them. That understanding is where durable advantage lives.